Welcome everyone who is here with us today. My name is Callan Steinman. I'm Curator of Education here at the Georgia Museum of Art, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, An Artist Talk with Kota Ezawa. And as time allows, we will moderate as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation during a Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Nelda Damiano, who is our Pierre Daura Curator of European Art and the in-house curator of the exhibition Kota Ezawa, The Crime of Art. Thank you.
Thank you, Callan. So I'm really glad that you could join us tonight, as Callan said. And so, and thank you, Kota Ezawa, for being here. And I just thought that I would say a few words about our guest tonight, in case you don't know him yet. So Kota Ezawa looks to the news, popular culture, history, and cinema to source material for his work, which explores how recording technologies shape our understanding of current events and images, beginning with his 2002 video, The Simpson Verdict, in which he used digital drawing software to animate footage of the O.J. Simpson trial. Kota Ezawa has authored videos, light boxes, and works on paper that distill found imagery into an abstracted and pared down visual language. He's been a very busy artist, and his work has been shown in solo exhibitions at Baltimore Museums of Art, at Site Santa Fe, and Hayward Gallery Project Space in London, among others. Ezawa participated in the 2019 Whitney Biennial and the Shanghai Biennale in 2004, and his work is included in numerous collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Modern Art, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. And so we are very honored to have him join us and hear him say a little bit more about his work. Thank you, Kota. I'll let you be the star.
Okay, I hope I can live up to this at least a little bit. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm also, to those of you who are in Athens, Georgia, I'm so sorry I wasn't able to come here in person. Some of you might know I have a history with Athens and the university. I was a visiting artist there in 2014 and spent a really memorable time there. And yeah, sad that due to everything going on, I wasn't able to come. And also, I hope that this can be as much a conversation as it can be in this kind of digital platform. I'll start by sharing a few images and videos from my desktop. And then as Callan said, you're welcome and encouraged to chime in, and then hopefully we can have kind of a chat at the end of this. Okay, so here we go. Yeah. So this is a photograph of the video that was mentioned by Nelda in the introduction, The Simpson Verdict. I made this video in 2002, and this is a view of this video at MoMA in New York in 2007 in an exhibition called Out of Time. And in the background to the right, you see an installation by the British sculptor Rachel Whiteread. And I don't know, I was so stoked and still am super happy that my piece landed exactly next to hers. For those of you who aren't familiar with her practice, she makes kind of these kind of ghost architectural, sculptural installations that are very haunting and very mesmerizing. And I feel I'm also kind of in the business of making some kind of ghost image, but visually very different from Rachel Whiteread's, but I feel kind of a companionship to her. Next, I want to show just like a short excerpt from this video.
Mrs. Robertson. Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, further find the special circumstance that the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, has in this case been convicted of at least one crime of murder of the first degree and one or more crimes of murder of the first or second degree to be not true. Signed this second day of October 1995, Juror 230. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your verdict? So say you one, so say you all. Yeah.
Okay, so as mentioned, this was, oops, are you still all there? Oops. Yeah, as mentioned, this was made in 2002. I was a grad student at that time in California. And I was really interested in how, you can take like a camera recorded image and then formally transform it into an animation. And I came up with this process. It's pretty much like a self-made up process. And that takes a really long time and is very manual and labor intensive. And that was just the result of it. In retrospect, there are a lot of kind of like personal things that actually took place in this piece that I wasn't even aware of when I made this. I moved to the United States in 1994 from Germany, and that was exactly when the Simpson trial was going on. So the O.J. Simpson trial was really how I first experienced the United States. And I feel that kind of played out in this film. The other thing that played a role is after my undergrad, I had this funny job where I videotaped depositions for law firms and reporters. So I was very familiar with like courtrooms and legal speak. So I think also making the Simpson verdict was a little bit me coming to terms with my past as a legal videographer. I'll jump to the next piece. Okay. Hold on. Here we go. So this was done a few years after that. This is like an outdoor projection during Art Basel, the big art fair in Miami Beach. And the video is called Beatles over California. And I'll just, before talking about it, I'll just play a tiny bit from it.
Governor Jerry Brown, IRS files and never frowns. Soon I will be president. Out of power will soon go away. I will be Führer one day. I will command all of you. Your kids will meditate. Your kids will meditate too. California, over Alice. California.
Okay, that was probably enough. This piece was an homage to San Francisco artist and filmmaker Bruce Conner, who had died just before I made this piece. And it was part of an exhibition honoring Bruce Conner at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And Bruce Conner, for those of you who are not familiar with his work, was an artist, but he was also very connected to the San Francisco punk scene. And what's taking place in this video is that I matched up the image of the Beatles playing Twist and Shout with the San Francisco punk anthem California über alles by the Dead Kennedys. And it was kind of amazing how easy it was to match up the image with the sound. There didn't seem to be image and sound. Like very often we use sync sound or recorded images with sound attached to it. But I really like playing around with it. And you will see more of that in later works. What we're looking at right now is another video piece called The City of Nature, which I think is also part of the exhibition at the Georgia Museum of Art. And this one was commissioned for a public park in New York City, Madison Square Park. So they asked me if I could make a film that could be shown in the park. And first, this came to me as kind of like a contradiction. How can you want to watch a TV while you're sitting in a park? You really want to listen to birds chirping or squirrels chasing each other. And so I made a film that is really like my attempt of making like a landscape painting in an animated form. And I'll also show you a little excerpt from that. Okay. I have a couple more things lined up, so I'll just keep plugging. And then if there are any questions or comments about the piece, I'd be happy to take that up in the Q&A. What this piece, City of Nature, also started for me is that I really like this idea of showing work in public spaces other than gallery spaces and museum spaces. A few years after showing City of Nature in this park in New York, I was invited to do a few temporary public art installations. This is one called Hand Vote that I showed in Canal Park in Washington, D.C. And it's, it's just a group of people raising their hands to vote. And I like, it wasn't done specifically for DC, but it really fits to obviously to the city, because Washington is the center of the political life in the United States. But it also has this funny issue with voting, because the residents of Washington, DC are actually not voting for representatives in Congress. So there's kind of a lack of a chance to vote, even though this is the capital of the United States. And so I found this was a good environment for the piece. Here's another view of it. I also liked how, making work in public invites different audiences than when you show something in a museum and people just like pass by and have a spontaneous reaction to it. And what a lot of people did in front of the sculpture is that they felt they should, raise their hand and take a selfie, which I very much welcome. This is another temporary public art installation. This was done at the Yerba Buena Center in San Francisco in 2013, and was actually a very similar moment to the moment we have right now. In the fall of 2012, Hurricane Sandy wreaked havoc on the East Coast, and even though I live on the West Coast, it made the news, and I know a number of people in New York who had basements flooded, and there was a lot of damage. I'm sure a lot of you on the East Coast remember. And right at that moment, the museum asked me to make a proposal for a public sculpture. So what I proposed was to rebuild this amusement park in New Jersey, the Seaside Heights boardwalk that had just been washed into the ocean by the hurricane. And to people who didn't really know what this amusement park was, it was just this kind of happy, childlike, colorful sculpture. But people who were familiar with it also definitely saw the melancholy of it. I'll jump to the next one. This is a more recent public art piece. It was done for the international terminal of the San Francisco International Airport, and also a very recognizable image. This is the Beatles exiting an airplane, and then I overlaid like a color scheme taken from a Piet Mondrian painting on top of it. And I often come up with these ideas very quickly and very spontaneously, and then making the work oftentimes takes very long. And then oftentimes these funny connections come up that I could not have planned or could not have anticipated when I first came up with the idea. And this one, it was that the Beatles really played their last live concert in San Francisco in Candlestick Park, which is really just like a stone throw away from the airport. So it's not, now I'm very happy with where this image lives and that it has a connection to the place. Okay, and now we're looking at the work that's also at the Georgia Museum of Art. The show is called The Crime of Art, and here's a group of light boxes also installed at the museum. They are remakes of the 13 artworks stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, which was like the most valuable art heist in the history of the United States and maybe the world. Among them were 2 large-scale Rembrandt paintings, one of the few Rembrandt seascapes. And these paintings have now been missing for 25, 30 years. And even though there's like an intensive FBI search for it ongoing, no suspects have been arrested and no traces of the whereabouts have been made. So they're also like one of the big puzzles of the art world. I replicated these paintings in my drawing style, but at their original size. So there's like a small Degas drawing next to the larger Rembrandts and Vermeers. This project was triggered by also by another news story. This one was that in 2015, security videotape was kind of unearthed, taken the night before the heist, where you see this kind of suspicious activity going on in the museum. And the New York Times posted this video on their website in the hopes that people would recognize people that are caught on the security tape, and that this would lead. It was like a hot trace to the whereabouts of the paintings or to identify suspects, but it led nowhere. But it's just kind of like an example how more and more I'm interested in working with events or stories that are very close to the current moment. here's my remake of the Vermeer painting, The Concert, the Rembrandt, and the Rembrandt Seascape. Part of the exhibition also is a video that I made after that, after doing these first works, called The Crime of Art, just like the exhibition. And this one is kind of like the City of Nature that we saw earlier, like an assemblage of Hollywood movie scenes. This one of Hollywood movies in which art is stolen. And I'll play you a little bit from that.
It's down here.
Whereas the famous Istanbul dagger contains the 4 world's most priceless emeralds, the Topkapi treasury is also famous for the extraordinary ornamental headdress worn by the past.
Yeah, I really like the fact that this is now being played in a museum. I feel there's like a kind of self-reflexivity going on, and that museum goers can watch a video that tells you how to remove artworks from a museum. We've gone on for a while, so maybe I'll just show you one more piece. This is a piece I finished in 2019 that was shown at the Whitney Biennial. It's called National Anthem. The video is just 1.5 minutes long, so I'll just play it with you, and maybe we can end the presentation part with that. Okay.
Super. Well, thank you, Kota. Thank you so much. And we, if you're okay, we did get a few questions actually as you were talking. And
Please,
so,
please.
yes, so I'll read these to you. Francis asks, have you ever experimented with tape art? If you have, how would you compare it to your light box pieces?
Okay. So very clear answer. I have not, but I'm familiar with the field genre of tape art. I have friends actually that call TW5, and they're like a fantastic pair of tape artists, and I have one of their pieces at my house. Yeah, it's very different. Like the way I work is there's a manual process to it, but yeah, I don't use vinyl cutting processes, but I have a ton of respect for it, and I love that. I love the work that comes out of that corner.
Yeah, well, this is my question, actually. If you could, would you mind maybe telling us a little bit more about the actual process, the manual process? Because you mentioned often that it's time consuming, or, you know, it's
Sure.
labor intensive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like super apparent when you see the work. So it's basically, it's not a freehand drawing style, but it's like a tracing. So I take a piece of video or a photograph of an old painting and trace over it on the computer. And then the traces are filled out with solid blocks of color. And then in the case of my most recent pieces that are like the watercolor animation we just watched, I take these computer printouts and then trace them back onto watercolor paper and then fill them in with watercolors. So it's like an endless, it almost feels like a game of telephone, you know, where you whisper something in someone's ear and then that person whispers it into someone else's ear. And then, like, you know, the message gets a little bit jumbled, but that's kind of what I'm interested in, is like how, yeah.
This kind of back and forth, or until.
Yeah, or like starting with a real image and then kind of slowly making it your own.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And I could bore you by telling you the software programs I use or so, but I feel, you know, nowadays, most kind of digital processes are at everyone's fingertips, and you just got to find the tools you're comfortable with.
Sure. Another question from Elizabeth asks, I would love to hear more about your approach or take on appropriation as part of your art form.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess in some ways, appropriation always sounds kind of like, you know, a little bit like, ooh, you're doing something forbidden or like mischievous or so. But I'm of the generation that I grew up in the very early days of hip hop, like where people like Grandmaster Flash or Public Enemy were kind of the newest thing on earth. And they were really taking old records and turning them into new records. And I think that's one thing that influenced my way of these kind of DJ practices, influenced my way how I work with images. And I never thought of it as kind of stealing something. It's more like, you know, that's what you do when you take something old and make something new out of it. That said, I'm also, with the work that I showed today, not so much, but with another series called The History of Photography Remix, people have actually really accused me of, you know, stealing and being an appropriator and not asking for permission and all these kind of things. And that was very stressful to me. Like, it happened to me very early on in my art career that, you know, these accusations were made. But now in retrospect, I felt that was a very good experience, because I had to just kind of like stand up and say like, no, it's my work and I do it out of conviction. And the little bit of like thievery that's part of it is maybe also why I was drawn to subject matter like art theft and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's transformation more than appropriation or interpretation.
Or like, I mean, I think we've all, people have appropriated not only since 1990, but like forever.
Yes, that's not a new concept to, copy other artists or to be inspired, emulate, or yes. Thank you. We have, still a lot of questions. So Francis asks, have you seen of Lupin the Third manga and animation? So I don't know, Lupin the Third?
No.
She says, she asked due to the fact that Lupin, the main character, is the world's most wanted thief in his universe. There are a series of books, Arsène Lupin, and he's a thief. I think maybe that's what Francis is referring to. But I guess you haven't, but there's a series on Netflix that's pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, I have two young kids, so like my time on Netflix is very limited.
No TV for you. Okay.
Yeah, but that said, I think I see one of the questions here in the chat. Also, like my connection to cartoons. I mean, I grew up watching some cartoons like every kid. When I was little, Kimba the White Lion, which was like a Japanese manga TV series, was like my favorite, even though all the adults back then thought it was too violent and too much and I have a huge respect for manga and anime and these like Japanese influenced Japanese animation and cartoon forms, and also many Western and Eastern European animation, but I'm by no means an expert at it. I know about it as much as everyone else.
I see. Yeah.
And I want to say, like, I didn't go to animation school or there wasn't any animation classes at the art school I went to. Like, my upbringing was more kind of coming from conceptual art and avant-garde art practices. And then animation was just like one of my weird concepts and ideas that I had. And I felt, maybe it would have been good for me to go to a formal animation training, but the process that I have developed is just like how I was able to make animation with my own limited means.
Right. Okay. Teresa asks an interesting question. She says, how much has the computer process itself changed from the Simpson piece to the Crime of Art, series? So I don't know.
I mean, it changed. Like the Simpson verdict, I was made on one of these like bubbly iMacs. They looked like I don't know. It looks like an ancient beast. And I remember the computers were so slow at the same time. You couldn't draw and listen to music at the same time. You could only do one of the two. And so it has changed in that way, that computers have become faster and tablets have become kind of better. But basically the process is, and maybe also my drawing style has become a little bit more nuanced or detailed, but in general, I kind of stayed true to my original process. Mm-hmm. I've developed it, but I've also I tried to keep it interesting to myself. You saw me do like wood sculptures or watercolor paintings, light boxes, but I haven't really tried to reinvent the wheel. And so in a way, it's like it's like doing the same job every day. It changes slightly, but has stayed pretty consistent.
We do have a great question from Robin, who says, most of your art relates to US politics and society. As one who was raised outside of the US, how did this come about so strongly in your art?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't want to overload the lecture, but the work that I'm doing right now, and that's going to open in an exhibition in New York on Thursday, is actually all related to Germany. But I found that being an immigrant to the United States gives you kind of like I live here, so I'm not like a foreigner per se, and I have a US passport at this point, but I still feel like slightly removed. I didn't watch the same TV shows like everyone else, and I still have a foreign accent. So I think that's kind of like a very nice, like I have a little bit more of a bird's eye view than maybe people who have lived here all their lives. On the other hand, I must say I've always been fascinated with the United States, like many people. I mean, like when I was a teenager, I was a huge Prince fan, for example, and I could have also listened to ABBA or something Led Zeppelin or something coming from the UK, but I was always fascinated with this country, even though I realize it's not unproblematic, and
right, yeah,
maybe that makes it interesting.
Okay, I'm just going to go through these a little bit. I have another question about, I'm really curious why you chose strings for the national anthem. It's a very different effect than an a cappella vocals, which would have been the original timbre associated with the sporting events pictured. So yeah, if you could talk about the choice of music or sounds, or how do you choose those?
Actually the national anthem had, I was in the beginning, I just had the sound footage from the original, from the events where these football players were kneeling. So it would cut from like one vocal performance of the national anthem to the next. Okay. But making this very short animation took me like more than a year. And after listening to it for like 6 months, I honestly just couldn't take it anymore. All of the like belting of the national anthem. And also I didn't feel it really matched the kind of tone of the image. And I found this string version of the national anthem, which was also performed in a stadium, but actually in front of before a baseball game. And this was also one of the first times where I've used music and in this case I didn't go the appropriation route, but I actually contacted the string quartet and said like, hey, I found your really awesome recording of the national anthem. Do you mind if I use it for my art installation? And they were so generous to say yes. And yeah, I think also my newest animation, which will be premiere later this week, also uses a string quartet. And I think there's kind of a nice interplay between the texture of the watercolor and the vibration of the strings. For some reason, they're kind of like, to me, they're like a match made in heaven. And so, yeah, that inspired that choice.
Quite powerful, for sure. And I just remember, of course, San Francisco. That was the team. The quarterback plays in San Francisco. Oh, yeah. That's why it would have been something you were very much aware of. So we actually have a question that pertains to the crime of art. So what is your idea of what happened to the Gardner works?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, honestly, whenever I start a piece like that, I don't actually know that much about it. I just like get excited about an idea and then I jump into it. But now that I've lived with the work for some time, I would say, and Nelda, you're the art historian, correct me if I'm wrong, if these pieces still exist, they're probably in pretty bad shape. I mean, they haven't, old paintings like that really need to be cared for, and I doubt that, but like, who knows? I would love if they turn out and they're in the living room of some mafiosi or whoever, that would be the best possible outcome, but chances are they're somewhere and they're in really bad shape.
It's true. I mean, it's, we all have our ideas of what's happened with them, but it's so hard. I'm a bit like you. What if they just turn up one day, like as if nothing happened, and maybe they've survived, or maybe they've been, torn up or just destroyed. We do have a question from some of our students. Avery asks, so I'm going to see your exhibition in a class tomorrow. Is there anything you think I should look at in particular, or questions I should ask?
Yeah, to me, making art is not very different from making music or anything else. What I try to do as an artist, I try to create some kind of an experience for the viewer, but then what the viewer takes away from it is completely up to the viewer, and I welcome any reaction, from excitement to, you can also be taken aback, or be bored. It's all in the range of possibilities. And it's like, I also, I know that museums are always thought as these kind of places that house these treasures, and but I hope that people of different ages and backgrounds get to see it. And I always learned, I learned something from what people have to say about it or think about it.
Yes. Yeah, it's been well received. I can tell you that, your exhibition. It's quite popular in the galleries. So maybe one last question. Can you explain how you come up with ideas and what your process is when developing your work? So we've talked a bit about your process, but maybe, what you react to or what inspires you or something.
Yeah, it's such a
broad question.
No, but also such a, that's like the key. If I had the real answer to it, my job would be done. But it's like, I think as artists, you constantly hunt for inspiration. But then when inspiration strikes you, you just have to kind of grab it and run with it, and don't kind of second guess yourself. For those of you who are in the chat who are art students, I think that's kind of the recipe. If something excites you, jump on it, and don't be ashamed if, or just kind of go with it. And that's the art of being an artist, is to kind of clear your antennas and to be sensitive to it. I feel it always comes from somewhere, from your environment, or from your life, or from your life experience. And then when you have this moment of inspiration, to just recognize it and run with it, and don't look back.
That's some good advice. That's some good advice. Thank you. I think the last one is just, does your repeated use of the Beatles as subject matter come from your own interest, or was it influenced by whoever commissioned it?
Oh yeah, that's kind of funny. I realized that after putting together the talk, that there's 2 Beatles pieces, and kind of dates me as older statesman. But then also, this is not the only, they do come back in my work. I made another piece called Lennon Sonntag Boys, where I animated the Bed-In for Peace by Yoko Ono and John Lennon. So I do have an affinity to them, and maybe there's also something I weirdly have in common with them, is it's always kind of a miracle how the Beatles can stay popular over this amount of time, kids 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and today can sing Let It Be and Yesterday in these songs, and maybe because they're simple and they kind of kept it simple and didn't make it overly complicated. And that was also always my recipe. I didn't really believe in making things overly complicated for that people need like an instruction manual to get through it, but to make things accessible, and so many people have a chance to interact with it.
Yes. Okay. I think we've pretty much, I'm just double checking because some people originally had put some questions in the chat, but I think they were answered throughout the others. You did get a lot of thank yous, of course. And so,
well, thank you for spending your afternoon.
yes, it was a real pleasure. And I know that Callan put some information in the Q&A, but your exhibition will run until December 5th. So I'm reminding everyone, and it is free admission, and we are open every day except on Monday, and we are open late on Thursday until 9 p.m. So Kota, thank you so much. I hope you do make it to Athens at some point, maybe hopefully before your exhibition closes. And I know you have something coming up in New York, so we'll be looking out for that. And we'll follow your work very closely. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.